All right, 3, 2, 1, we're recording. Hey, everybody, how's it going? I think I've got victim number 7 or 8 on the phone. When I say victim, it's my interview victim because I kind of feel sorry for them. They have to sit here and talk to me and be recorded and listen to my stupid questions. But I have Janelle on the line. Janelle, how are you?
I'm doing great, thank you.
Well, you're welcome. Janelle sent me an email within the last week or two, and I read through it, and I thought I could tell right off the bat she had some exceptional stories to share with all of us, and I knew she'd be a great guest to do as a recording. So Janelle has several years of experiences with these creatures. Janelle, would you like to just start at the beginning, how this kind of
Sure.
came to light and how you got into this? Just tell us whatever you want to tell us. Go right ahead.
Okay. Well, I rented this farmhouse. I had just come up from Florida, and I rented this farmhouse out in the middle of 200 acres, about 15 miles outside of a small town in Virginia. After I'd been there a while, I decided to buy the house, and I was buying it from the farmer who owned the land. After I had been, I guess a while into it, he decided he wanted the house back for his daughter. And I had already done so much to the house, I wasn't about to just let him have it back. So he did a few mean things to try to get me to leave, and I just wasn't going to have it. So I ignored him. I started having these experiences with what I thought were people that he'd hired from his place where he worked, this lumber place, to try to scare me in the middle of the night to try to get me to leave. And so that's what I thought it was. Well, it started out, I moved in this place. My furniture wasn't there yet. I had 2 little dogs, little Shih Tzus, and we were sleeping in the living room on the floor, waiting for the furniture to get there. And the first night, this woman screamed from down in the woods, way back behind the house. And there was nothing back there but woods that went on for miles. And it was a blood-curdling scream, like she was being torn, like her arms and legs were being torn off of her. And she screamed for, I don't know, it seemed like forever. It was probably 5 minutes or maybe a little less. And I didn't know whether to call the police or what to do. But at the time, they hadn't even installed the phone yet. So I couldn't call anybody. So I let that go by. Several nights later, some huge animals were fighting in the circular driveway that went by the side of the house. And they were huge. They were snarling and growling, and you could hear them hitting each other. And they were sort of angrily talking some kind of gibberish, but in anger. And they were snarling and growling, and it was horrible. It was horrible. I was truly terrified. But the dogs never reacted, which I thought was real strange. So that lasted a while, and that stopped. So I kept telling myself it was some kind of great big cat or something fighting. And I knew it was bigger than any kind of cat that lived in that area, but I thought that's what I'm going to have to think. So it went on, and then at night, at 10 o'clock at night, I'd take the little dogs out, and there was a farm light out at the entrance to the driveway, and I was 9/10 of a mile way back in the woods from the main road. And I'd walk out under this farm light and wait for the little dogs to do what they had to do before we went to bed. And the farmer, there was pasture up in front of the house on that side, woods around the other 3 sides. And there was a barn way up there, halfway up the distance to the highway, where he kept his big, heavy equipment. And something was up there that would stomp down into the pasture, making these horrible guttural sounds and some kind of gibberish and so forth, and occasional growl. And they would stomp. There was several of them, and they just all stomp out there at one time, obviously trying to scare me. So I just stood my ground. I couldn't see them because they were well outside the range of that farm light. And So finally, eventually, I had that farm light turned off because I thought it could attract more trouble than it was protecting me from. And I just had it dark because I didn't want anybody seeing the farm light from the road. So I would then turn on the one little porch light and stand out there with them that way. And then the charging stopped. Then, let's see. Then I had furniture and I moved to the upstairs bedroom. At night, something would come under the window, be talking in some kind of gibberish. I thought that these were people that he had hired to try to scare me. So idiot that I was, I'd open the window and I'd talk back to them. And I'd say, hey, guys, you know, you've done your job, get paid. You're not scaring me. I know you're down there. You can go home. You've done a good job. Tell him you did it. and then, you know, then I'd go to bed. Well, I noticed that it woke me up, as a matter of fact. A couple of nights, there were songbirds chirping around 2 a.m., and a lot of them. And this group of songbirds would move from my front yard slowly, like the speed people would walk, down into the pasture and down a farm road through the pasture, down into the backwoods, chirping all the time. I knew it wasn't possible, but that's what I heard. The other thing was when I first moved into the house and I'd go outside, sort of poking around the yard and checking little outbuildings and stuff, every time, it was the middle of the day, every time I'd go outside, owls would hoot, you know, like big-horned owls, big owls. And they would first hoot right up next to the yard, right there in the edge of the woods, and you'd hear them continue to hoot down that hill that went down to the creek, and then way up to the west where that creek branch went. And they'd be hooting at a distance. And I thought, they must be a still down there. And these guys are watching me to make sure that I'm not going to be interested in walking that creek. So I thought it was people again. But every time I came out, because obviously they were signaling to each other. I mean, this was clear and obvious. And this went on for weeks and weeks. So that was another thing, the owls. Then, let's see, I'm trying to think. When these things were under my window at night, apparently they were also sleeping in the yard because under the little dogwood tree out front, the grass was mashed down in the shape of a huge animal in a fetal position. And I kept looking at that. I'd go out there and look at that. Then I'd take the mower, I'd mow at a high thing, but it would fluff the grass up. And I cut tall because I wanted to see it again. Sure enough, there it was again. And it had nothing, no shape like a deer or anything like that because it was like a massive ball, huge. And it was just mashed, the grass was mashed as flat as it could be. So that happened a lot. But they came every night in some form or another. It was constant. I built a big deck on the back of the house. The house was facing in an odd direction. So my front door was actually off the side. The real front door, and all along the other side, there were no lights because the electric had to be replaced. And so the three areas where the woods were, you couldn't see anything. There was no light to see. So this is where they had most of their activity. And then one night, I had dinner at a friend's house, and I came home after dark. Well, I had chickens by then, and they were in a pen with a 6-foot fence around it, and they could get into the coop and roost, but I had to close the door of the coop. And so I couldn't see back there, so I drove the truck up into the front yard, pointing in the direction of the coop, and put the high beams on so I could see to walk down there and close the door. Well, as I was walking down there, on the right-hand side of me, just outside the car light area, I saw two huge yellow eyes staring at me from a height of about 8 feet, higher than any human being could be, and higher than a large deer or any other animal that I knew of could be. The eyes were large and they were glowing yellow. I managed to block out the fear. I kept on going. I closed the chicken coop, I closed the gate, came back. I did not look over on that side again. I slowly walked back to the truck, got in it, backed up, and put it back in the driveway. That was, oh, and while I was doing that, this huge elk, or not elk, a buck, goes flying along the edge when I was backing up and the lights were shining on the wood. This buck went flying down the edge of the wood with its eyes looking wild, like it was scared of something. So I couldn't help but think that whatever had the big yellow eyes was scaring that animal. So that was a scary thing right there. But I've learned, I don't know, I know better than to run. I know better than to act scared, because as soon as you do, you've lost.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with you.
Yeah, you just have to act like, you know, whatever it is an everyday occurrence. Then this farmer had cattle, and quite a large herd of cattle. And I had also had cattle when I had my own farm. And my cattle were totally quiet. Occasionally you'd hear a moo, not often. His cattle, all night long, mooing all night long. You could barely sleep because of it. Every night they just kept on and on. Now, they had to go down to that creek to get water. That's where they got their water. They had to go through the woods and down the creek from the pasture they were in. So something was disturbing them. Well, one time I saw him dragging two, probably 600-pound calves that were dead. He was dragging them down across that pasture into the woods, where there was a trail that went down into the woods. By law, you have to bury dead livestock. But he wasn't doing it. He was dragging them. So after he finished all that, I decided to take a walk down and see where he took them. Well, he took them as far as the path would go, and there they were at the end of the path. Well, knowing what was going on, that there was some huge animal or group of animals around there, not knowing precisely what they were at that point, I thought I'd go down there and look the next day. They were gone, completely gone, not just eaten into. Yeah, they had disappeared. And they were huge and bloated, and, you know, I mean, these were big calves. So I don't know what killed them, you know, but they were dead. And I know that he was missing some young calves, newborn calves, completely missing them. So I don't know where they went, but I had a feeling. So anyway, then another thing, they stopped charging me and so forth. But when I'd take the dogs out, they'd stand there in the driveway facing the dark part of the yard, wagging their tails. They saw something that they were wagging their tails. Scared me.
Yeah.
So I call them and go back in. And the other thing was, when I built that deck, it was a huge deck, but because of the little dogs, I had a gate put on the steps that went down. And I kept the gate closed all the time, and it had a little lock on it. Well, at night, something big with very heavy footsteps would get on that deck and walk around. Well, I was beginning to think I knew what it was. And so I saw this thing in the little electric co-op newsletter thing that would come in the mail. And I was glancing at it and saw the classified section. And in there was an ad from a man in Northern Virginia who had said, if you think that you have Bigfoot on your property, let me know. So I called him, and I told him the things I'd been experiencing. And he said, oh, absolutely, that's what it is. He said, may I come down there with a friend of mine so we can check the area? So I said, sure, come on. Well, they came down from Washington. They went down and searched along the creek and found teepees and nests and all sorts of things like that, and lots of them. So they came back up to tell me, well, they came down a number of times and brought some other people. And they all kept looking around. And finally they brought cameras, you know, game cameras and things like that, and set them up everywhere. And they put a television screen in my room upstairs connected to these cameras so I could switch channels and see what was going on with cameras. Well, I was by myself, and something about that just scared me. So I'd never watched that screen because I thought, you know, what if I see something? I don't want to see it. hear it.
I think I would be the same way.
Yeah, it's something about, you can hear it, you know it's out there, but I don't want to see its face. I just don't want to see it, because then I'll have to be scared. But then he never got any live pictures, but he did get some strange-looking geometric shapes that were very strange-looking. They were like all kinds of geometric boxes. I never understood what that was.
He shared his evidence with you.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
And he had a van that was completely outfitted with everything you can imagine. Night vision, this, that, the other. He was ready.
He was a Ghostbuster, wasn't he?
Well, he was a Bigfoot Buster. and it was fascinating. I mean, he had so much equipment in there, and it was amazing. But so the last time he and another fellow were down there was a Sunday afternoon, and they searched around, found nests and all the things, and then they were leaving about 5 o'clock. And as they were going out the driveway, I thought, oh, good, I'll walk the little dog up the road. And by then I only had one little dog, and so we started walking up there. And back in the woods, this animal was having an anger fit, jumping up and down, screaming, hitting the side of the tree with a limb or something, another piece of wood, just banging the life out of the tree, jumping up and down. You could hear it jumping up and down and hitting the ground and hitting the leaves and screaming and having a fit. Well, I knew immediately it was angry because those guys had been down in its area. So the dog and I turned around and went back in the house. That night, whatever it was, came up to the side to the house, and I had a little office off the kitchen, and I was sitting in there, and this thing came and hit the side of the wall so hard that I almost felt like I could see the outline of its arm. Why it didn't come through that wall, I guess because it was old oak. Probably the only reason it didn't. So I called that guy. He had just gotten back up to Washington. And I called him and told him what happened. He said, oh, yeah. He said, that's typical ape behavior when they're angry. Then another interesting thing was I saw one. That was, I guess, one of the main things. This was earlier. I had taken the dogs for a walk. And this is strange because every night I'd let the chickens out about an hour before roosting time so they could run and eat bugs and stuff and not tear up my landscaping. They wouldn't have time to. And I had some geese. I had 8 white geese, and at that time I had a goat. Well, everybody wanted to go for a walk. So we would go up the road. I'd have 2 dogs, 8 geese, 24 chickens. Oh, and I had a guinea who just happened to show up one day and stayed, and the goat, and everybody loose. We'd all go for a walk up the road and cut over to where that man had his buildings, and then come back, and they also had blueberry bushes. And then we'd come back down the side of the woods, and I was calling the little male Shih Tzu because he was lagging behind. I kept saying, come on, Bandit. And I saw one of the chickens had come up in the field. Normally they just stuck around the yard. And I thought, that chicken's going to get eaten by something. So I had my eye on this chicken, and I thought, I'm going to get down there and shoo it back to the house. Well, just as I got close to the chicken, I see over on my left-hand side in the woods, there's this juvenile Bigfoot watching the chicken. It heard me coming. It didn't leave when it heard me coming. It didn't leave until I turned towards it. And then it just turned right around and walked straight back into the woods.
That is amazing. What was the distance?
Well, I don't know how to measure distance exactly, but I can tell you this. I was close enough up to it to get a real close look at its hair. And it probably couldn't have been 10 or 15 feet, maybe. But it's the hair on its back. And, it was in no hurry. You could tell it wasn't afraid of any of us. Not the dogs, not me. The dogs never noticed it. None of the other animals noticed it. But it's the hair on its back looked exactly like a German shepherd's hair. Now, it was brown, but it had the same texture and the same length. Oh. You know how German shepherd has sort of coarse hair?
Yeah.
And the links on the dog's back of the hair? It looked just like that.
Okay.
The texture exactly. So anyway, it went on back. We kept on walking, and that was the end of that. Chicken went home. I wasn't afraid of it at all. I had no fear of it. It was small enough where it was obvious it was a juvenile. So, none of us had any fear and went on back in the house. And that's how I really knew that for sure that's what I had. But I had two exceptionally frightening things happen. The first one was when I first got those chickens and geese, and they were babies. I had raised them on the sun porch, and that day I had taken them out to their outdoor home for the first time, came back in, was fixing dinner. It was about 6 o'clock at night, and all of a sudden there was a roar. And when I say roar, it was like 10 lions at once or 4 sets of cow lungs working in unison. And this thing roared a deep, guttural roar that was the loudest thing coming from a living thing that I've ever heard. And it just went on and on. It never stopped to take a breath. I went flying out. My first thing was, oh, my little animals, my little geese and little chickens. So I go flying around, little dogs with me, outside, around the house, back to where the animals were in the little house I'd put them in. And when I got out there, that thing was still going, and the dogs, the geese, and the chickens all were standing dead still facing in the direction of that sound. Nothing moved. It was like they were caught in a time warp. It was, and you can't keep a goose quiet. I mean, they just yak, 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 yak all the time. And they were dead silent. The chickens were dead silent. And nothing moved. None of them moved at all. And that thing finally wore down, and stopped. Holy cow. Well, idiot that I am, I went flying back to the house, got the old rifle, went and jumped in the truck, and went after the thing. I went down the fire lane in the woods. I never saw it. Why I thought that I could ever, with a rifle, do anything against something that made a noise like that, I don't know what it was with me. It was stupid.
Were you after it on foot?
No, I ran and got in the truck. I got the rifle and got in the truck, and I drove the truck after it.
I got you.
Yeah, and by then it was dusk. I had to turn the lights on in the truck and the high beams, and I backed up and went forward and backed up and went forward. I looked in every direction, couldn't find any sign of anything. And then I went home and realized how stupid I was to have done that in the first place. I don't know why I have no fear like that.
You're brave. You're just brave.
I don't know. I think it could border more on stupid when it comes to something like that. But now I'll tell you the thing that scared me enough to make me want to leave. I was upstairs one night, sitting cross-legged on the bed, watching Pride and Prejudice or some such thing. And I had this climbing rose that went from had grown into these massive trunks intertwined. And the rose went up to the second story and went through the back of the stone chimney. There's a space up at the top between the house and the chimney, and had grown up to the window through that thing and was hanging back down on the other side of the chimney. Huge climbing rose. And the trunks from the thing were huge down at the ground. And I'm sitting there, and they had been jabbering in the front, out the other window. I hadn't, by then I just took it for granted. And all of a sudden, something hits the side of the wall with its feet, climbing up that rose bush. Thorns and all. I mean, that thing had thorns on it, a good half-inch long, these big, thick thorns, all the way up that huge trunk of that thing. And this thing, you could hear it pulling itself up by its hands. When it first jumped on the rose bush, its feet hit the wall. It was hanging onto the rose bush with its hands. And then it started climbing that rose thing. And you could hear the rose pulling out of behind the chimney because of the weight of whatever it was. Well, instantaneously, I run over there and slam the window down. The blind was already down, but the window was open. And I just reached under there and slammed that window down and locked it. and then turn the lights and everything off. But let me tell you, when that happened, apparently there was some little animal, a squirrel or something, up in the attic that I didn't know was there. Well, whatever this thing was scared that little animal so bad. That little thing ran back and forth, and you could hear it bouncing off wood. And I think it ran itself to death, literally. I think it was so terrified. It just kept running and running back and forth. And I thought that was the oddest thing I had ever heard.
Let me ask you, was it a trellis supporting this rose bush, or I can't imagine a rose bush?
Yeah, it was, I'll never forget it. It was a yellow rose. I had planted it right when I first moved in. And the thing had trunks. It had multiple trunks that were twisted around each other. And I would say some of those trunks were probably close to 2 inches thick.
Oh, I didn't know they got that big. Okay.
Yeah, some of them do. It was an old-fashioned rose, a rambling rose. It was yellow. I remember it quite well. In fact, I have pictures of that side of the house, and I have looked at that rose in those pictures thinking about when that happened.
Wow, that is terrifying.
Well, and think of anything that would grab, an old-fashioned rose has many more thorns than these hybrid things do.
Yep.
And it grabbed them with its hands, and it had to use its feet too on those thorns.
Yeah.
I just don't know how any living thing could stand that.
I don't know. I've always wondered, rabbits live in briars, and that's kind of how they protect. That's their security blanket, so to speak. And so some animals have a way to, I don't keep from getting stuck or whatever. I can't imagine something with arms and legs reaching up, grabbing the trunk of a rose bush with 1/2-inch thorns on it. You got to grip it. Now, from the time you started with your first, what would you say, evidence of something going on until where you are now, are you talking about a few months or a couple of years?
No, that was in that started about 1995 and went on for 6 years after that.
Okay.
And the reason I know it was 6 years because I was on a 10-year contract buying that house, and I sold it back to him after 6 years.
Okay.
Yeah, that's sort of my little frame of reference on time. I went back to Florida.
These encounters are just periodical. I mean, they're not, it's not just going on all the time.
No, this was going on all the time. They were out there all the time. Now there were a few months in the winter. I would say, probably mid-December to mid-March, they were gone completely.
Right.
And they'd come back around mid-March and stay there until, and one time, the reason I knew they were juveniles other than seeing that one was because one got apparently lost from his parents. There were these big ravines that would go down in different parts of the woods. And one night when I took the little dogs out, this young one was just screaming. It was you could tell it wanted its parents and that it was lost. And it was screaming for its parents. And I mean, it was just so obvious because it had their voice. Oh, but one of the interesting things is one of the anthropologists out in Washington who I talked to, he said that this was very common, which surprised me. But one night I was calling the little female dog Muffin. This thing was over in another set of barns on the other side of another pasture, and it was trying to say the word muffin. And it did a good job. And it was in that deep, it was apparently a big adult, and it had that real deep guttural voice. And it kept saying, muffin, muffin.
You're kidding me. It was mimicking you calling your dog.
Yeah. And this doctor, I can't remember his name now, but he's an anthropologist at some university up around Seattle. But anyway, he was telling me that is very common, that they've had many reports of that.
Yeah, I've heard. I have a friend of mine who I'm actually including a lot of his stories in a book I'm pulling together. But his grandmother, when they were kids, they grew up here in Mississippi, and when they were kids, his grandmother would call them in for supper. She'd holler out their names and, yoo-hoo or whatever grandmas do. And So the kids got used to this, and then every once in a while they'd hear it and they'd come in and be all ready to eat. And she'd go, I didn't call y'all in here. And they said, well, yeah, you did. And this guy's positive it was Bigfoot mimicking their grandmother. I just think that is so amazing.
I think it could be. I really think it could be.
He said it sounded just like her. Just like her.
Well, now this didn't. Mine didn't. But I mean, you could hear the word pronounced.
Yeah.
Now, if they can copy birds and things like that, I don't see why they couldn't copy her.
They've got to have a very complex set of vocal cords to do it, and a brain that's able to make those vocal cords do. You know, their tongue and their mouth and everything has to form almost like a human's does, because we're the only animals on the planet that speak in a language to each other.
Well, I think that they have their own language. I think that they definitely communicate with that gobbledygook. They talk, and they talk a lot. They talk an awful lot. But let me tell you one of the funniest things. It was the next night after this thing screamed at the edge of the woods. Apparently it went over the highway, across the highway, and down the hill to another old farm back there that this couple from Norfolk, Virginia had just inherited. And a friend of mine was caretaking it for them. And so they were coming in on a Friday night after work, spend the weekend there. And he met them, and they all went in the house and fixed a drink, sit down and have a drink. And all of a sudden, this thing started the same roar down there that it had at my house the night before. It scared those people so bad. They got their suitcases, they put them back in the car, and they told them, they said, we will never stay where that thing is. We will never be back.
Oh, I know. I bet.
And they never came back. They sold the place.
Wow.
They sold it. They never came back to sell it either. But it scared them that badly.
I know this, I'm going way back to the beginning of the conversation, but did you tell the audience where all this is happening, or did you decide not to?
It's Virginia.
It's in the state of Virginia. Okay.
Yeah, Southern Virginia.
Okay. All right.
And, well, I think that if you ever go to Google Earth and you look at the land and where the woods are, I think these woods come all the way down from up and around the Skyline Drive area, and they're not broken too many times. So there's sort of an area where they can just sort of walk on forever. I think that's what they do. I think that, they have plenty of area to go. I don't know where they go in the wintertime, but they've got somewhere where they go, probably close to the East Coast, because I know from the woods that were in the back of that house on over to where the farm I used to have was, I mean, those woods would just go on forever. The lumber companies owned all those woods, and so they, nobody ever built in them or anything else. And those woods are pretty permanent. They just replant them, recut them, replant them, but they stayed thick. But also, too, that area had a lot of UFO sightings as well.
Before you get into that, I have a question. Were you friendly with your neighbors in your house there in Virginia?
I didn't really have any neighbors.
Because I was curious.
200 acres.
I was curious if other people around the area, were you all talking and comparing notes or anything like that? No,
I didn't. I never mentioned this to the farmer that I was buying the house from, because for so long I thought it was him, and then by the time I realized it wasn't him, he was doing other, being really basically ugly, and I really didn't want to deal with him at all, so I never told him about it. And I didn't really know anybody else there.
Yeah.
Well, except the fellow who was at that farm across the highway. He knew about it.
So he was familiar with the creatures?
He was even able to duplicate the sound. I couldn't. I mean, because it's a sound that we've never heard before. Nothing else is in my lifetime. I've never heard that same sound. He was able to duplicate it, which surprised me, because I kept trying to figure if I could duplicate that sound, and I couldn't do it. Couldn't even come close.
So you had one neighbor you talked to.
Yeah, and he wasn't exactly a neighbor. I mean, everybody lives so far away from each other out there.
Yeah.
I knew him, but we never discussed all this. I never told him about all the things that were going on at the house.
You were about to get into some other things that have been happening. You want to go to that?
Okay. Yeah, UFO situation. Wherever I lived in that southern area of Virginia, there's a huge uranium deposit close to the surface of the earth in that area, and it's the biggest in the world. And many of the big companies have chemical rights and all that kind of stuff to that land. A lot of people have made a fortune selling a lot of that land to these big companies. I always wondered if it didn't have something to do with the fact that there were so many UFOs spotted around that area. And some of them went down the main street of the main small city. It was reported. I mean, it was even in the paper. It disappeared from the newspaper, even from their archives, which was strange. It went right down the length of Main Street, one a UFO. Then one that was out by my farm several nights in a row, it kept coming back. It also went over that city where they were playing a big baseball game, and everybody saw it. It was hanging over the farm next door to my farm. I called some friends that were pretty far away, but they were up on a hill, and they could see out over the woods over my way. And I asked them to go outside and look over there and see what they saw. They saw it too. At this location, at this place with the Bigfoot activity, I was coming home from 20 miles south of where I lived. I had been visiting somebody, and I was coming home on the back road, and I saw what looked like two bright balls in the sky over by where I thought the house was. And I kept going, and then one ball started to move, and it came over where I was driving back to where I had just come from, and the other ball stayed where it was, which still looked like it was over my farm. When I got to the farm, starting down that long driveway, I saw that ball. Then I was bringing some stuff to someone else. I thought, well, let me go do that. And then when I came back, it was gone. But when I went in the house, the phone was ringing, and the gal that I had been visiting way south called and said, hey, did you see? She said, my daughter-in-law just called, who lived near her, and said that she saw this great ball of light moving through the sky. Did you see anything like that when you were driving? I said, I sure did. It went right over my head. And so that was one that two saw. And then another man who lived near there used to work at a factory over in town, and he'd go in at 4 o'clock in the morning and open up the place, and once he opened it, he'd fix coffee and stand out there and look across the countryside. And he said he saw one almost every night hanging across the countryside. He said he'd just stand there and look at it. Well, then there was a local policeman who told me that he said, I don't know why I'm telling you this. He said, but never tell another soul. He said, I came over here with somebody else. We were looking for something. It was night, and we were going down a road next to your house, down below your house in the back. And all of a sudden, this bright object went flying past the back of the car, and we looked at each other. And then all of a sudden, over on the field, one side was woods on the left, and on the right was open field. I was on a dirt road, and he said, there's this big ball of white light hanging in the field over there, just off the ground, just floating. And he said, it scared us to death. He said, I didn't know what to do. He said, I couldn't turn around. It was a narrow dirt road. There was, ditch on both sides, nowhere to turn. And he said, so I kept on going, and I kept on going. That thing kept right by the side of us, and it kept going with us. And he said, we finally came to a dairy. I was able to turn around and head back out. And he said, when I did, he said the thing was over in the field across from the dairy entrance. And he said, just hanging there. He said, I thought, well, let me turn off my lights and see what happens. So he turned off his lights, and the thing started coming towards him. He said it scared him so bad, he wanted to turn on his lights, and he was so scared he couldn't remember how to do it. He said the only thing he could figure out how to turn on was the spotlight on the outside of the police car. He said as soon as he turned on that spotlight, the thing stopped and then just shot up into space. He said they were so terrified. He said he would never come back there again unless it was the middle of the daytime, and he would never go back on that road, ever.
That's a cop.
Yes.
I wonder if he ever reported that.
Oh, he was terrified somebody would find out.
Oh, he didn't want to report it, did he?
No, no. As a matter of fact, I know the only reason he told me was because I was getting ready to move back to Florida then, and he thought that I might have some antiques to sell, so that's why he came over. And so, you know, I didn't have anything to sell him, but we sat and talked, and for some reason he felt comfortable talking to me about that. Probably because he knew I was leaving, I wouldn't be here anymore, and I wouldn't talk to anybody. And you can't blame him. It's a small town. You know, the people can really be vicious. So you know, I don't blame him. I don't blame him at all. Yeah, I've had a couple of experiences. I even had one where I am now. I had one. I was out there once again. I tell you, you have to have a dog to see these things, because you have to go out with them last time at night and stand there while you're waiting for them to do their business. That's when you see everything. It's really the truth. I mean, most everything I've ever seen or experienced has been when I've been out there with the dog. But I was out there with another little dog. This was, about 3 years ago. It was in February. I remember that. And I'm standing there looking straight out from the house, waiting for her. And from behind the house comes this massive thing. It was it was oval from where I was, but I was so close. It couldn't have been much more than 500 feet off the ground. It was the size of a football field. It was huge, and the lights from the little town that I'm outside of were shining off of it, off of the bottom of the thing, and it just kept moving in the same direction. It was going about the same speed as a freight train. And you know, it didn't jump around like you hear these things do and all that. It was clearly on a course for somewhere, and I stood there watching it until it, you know, went over the treetops and was gone. I reported that one.
You had some remarkable experiences on this place. It's amazing.
I tell you, I think sometimes when you're like with the other place with all the Bigfoot, I mean, they could see that I loved my animals, that I was good to my animals, that I was close to my animals. And I think that they appreciate that. I think that's one of the things that makes them feel comfortable with you. I think sometimes you have to be sort of connected to nature in a way to be able to see some of these things. I don't know what the answer to that is, except most people are so caught up in their all the little busy stuff of their lives that they don't look. They don't have time to just stand and look and listen. You know, they don't have time for that.
Right.
Run to this baseball game or run to that practice or, you know, run here, run there, cook laundry, you know, and then watch television.
That's the way life is in the United States, and especially people who live in urban areas. It's just that way. There are a lot of distractions, and it's hard to, I don't know, what would you say, kind of, you know, get into yourself and your surroundings. But you said a couple of things that every time I talk to someone like you, I think of things that are going on around here that, and again, people keep saying, oh, Cam, you got them. You got Bigfoot. I don't think I do. But for the last 2 months, you know, I've got 5 dogs, and 3 times a day we go on a long walk in the mornings. It's about 1.5 miles. And then 3 more times during the day, I'll take a break from work and I'll walk them around about a 1/4 mile here just around my house, just to let them go to the bathroom and all that stuff. And then I take them out one more time at night before we go to bed. And what's funny is the last couple of months, about twice a week, all the dogs will come, you know, I let them out and they all run off. They all go out in the woods, and they'll all come back except my black little pit bull. Her name is Betsy. I'll call her and call her and call her. And where we live, it's dark. We don't have any street lights at all. I wear a headlamp when I go out at night. I'll be shining that headlamp all through those woods, and I can't find her anywhere. So I'll go in. 20 minutes later, I'll go out, can't find her. And then I'll find her right at the edge of the woods after I come back out again. You know, it just varies on when I finally find her. But she'll be just sitting at the edge of the woods. She'll just sit there, or she'll be standing just staring off in the woods. She won't be barking. She's not growling. She's not wagging her tail. She's not just showing any, you know, typical dog signs. She's just standing there staring, and it is so creepy. And I'll call her from the porch, and she won't come. And I have to walk out and I'll have to walk out, and I just walk up to her real slow and quiet you know, and I'll say her name when I get 10 or 15 feet from her. She'll turn around and look at me, and then she'll look straight back out in those woods. And I'll just stand there with her and look, trying to see what she's looking at. She may not be looking at anything, but she may just be listening. But she'll slowly turn her head.
Strange.
She'll slowly turn her head, and we'll walk back to the porch, and she comes in the house. It is so weird. But when you were talking about your animals all facing towards the woods earlier, that's exactly what I thought about. it's
Yeah. And the other dogs don't have any inclination to do that.
No. And Betsy she is always moving. She never stops. She never stops like that to just look at something or stare off into space. She's always moving, or I don't know, looking for water, whatever. What's that?
Is it the same spot every time?
Pretty much, yeah. It's right here actually behind my office. She'll just sit there right at the edge of the woods just staring. And it is so.
Have you ever gone back there exploring to see if you can see anything back in the daytime?
Oh, I'm back there all the time.
You haven't seen anything odd?
I never see anything odd here ever. And I walk. Over the month, each month I walk every inch of this place. And it's not on my property. It's probably a combined 500 or 600 acres. And I'm either riding it or walking it. And just because I like to be out, I just love to be out. And the dogs, they hang right with me everywhere I go. So anyway, but enough of that. I thought that was so, it's such a weird sight. And
It is weird.
I'm going to bring one of my big cameras. I usually keep them out here in the office, so I'm going to bring one in one night and try to film her doing that and show everybody on a video. Yeah, it's weird. Well, we're at almost an hour. Can you believe it? And I think I just took up 10 minutes of it. I'm sorry about that.
Oh, but I love that. I find all that fascinating. I really do.
Yeah.
Animal behavior is really interesting. Yeah, I like to watch to see what they do, and you know, different groups have different behavior patterns, and because I sit here in my office, look across a 5-acre pond, I get this, different times of year, I have different groups of animals come in, and I get to watch to see how they interact with each other and that type of thing. It's fascinating. Yeah. And now I have a huge pack of coyotes that just somehow have arrived. They howl, and my dog goes crazy, and I'm afraid for him to go out and roam on his own. Yeah, they'll kill them. They see dogs as competition. And their coyotes are, that's an animal, it's a whole nother topic, and I'm not an animal rights person at all, but I have a huge respect for that animal, and I won't get into all the details of why I do now, but they're I'll just tell you this, it's the oldest animal historically, and they are a unique North American animal that they're not found anywhere else in the world. And they've been here for, I think, I don't want to say a number, but pre-Pleistocene era. And they roam where they are now here in the East is not their natural range, although it is now. They're so able to adapt, and they're the most persecuted animal in the history of the world. There's never been an animal that men have tried to kill out more than the coyote. Well, and I have to say, I can understand it because, I can't tell you the number of nights on my own farm that I had to sit out there with a rifle all night in the truck with a spotlight and, try to protect my cattle and, especially in the spring. That's one animal that men can't control. They're naturally here. They've been. Oh, is that right? Right. No, yeah, coyotes. The only thing men have ever done with coyotes is try to kill them. And we cannot get rid of them. Matter of fact, the most persecuted animal on the face of the earth is the coyote, yet their numbers are more healthy than they've ever been in the history of the world. Now, isn't that amazing? I didn't know anything about that. That's fascinating. I just read an article that, a lot of hunters are kill them all because they're killing our deer and our turkey. And I just read an article, you probably don't follow this guy, but Steve Rinelli has a podcast and a website and a Netflix show called Meat Eater, and he just released an article about the coyote in the eastern United States, and they're not hurting the deer population at all. If you look at it as a whole, the eastern whitetail is as healthy as it's ever been.
deer hunters are killing more deer than they ever have. Yet there are more coyotes than there's ever been. So the coyote deer thing is a myth. It's not true.
Well, and also, too, I heard that they can't take one down unless they're in a huge pack to do it. And they probably don't need to. But, you know, since this group has been here, you know, squirrels are the bane of my existence with this bird feeder out here. and, you know, I do everything. I put Vaseline on the pole. I put WD-40 on the pole. I do everything I can think of. And, you know, they always figure it out eventually. And they turn the bird feeder upside down. So eventually I just stopped feeding the birds. This year, I have no squirrels, not a single squirrel. And in fact, I have almost no birds. I've never seen it like this.
What do you think's going on?
I don't know. There's nothing out here. I mean, you know, I wish they'd eat some frogs come spring. I must have 10 billion frogs of every kind. Everyone's got, I mean, I love listening to them, but sometimes they're so loud, I can't hear myself think.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't mind at all if they ate frogs.
Different areas go through ups and downs of squirrels and songbirds. You know, there are years we don't see many. This past year, I bet I've seen more squirrels than ever. I think it has a lot to do with the acorn crop, which helps the deer and all that stuff. So.
Well, I have hunters down here now that I never had before either. So, you know, I used to have turkeys walking through the yard every day and, you know, deer every day. I don't see anything anymore. It's sad. It'll
probably come back around. We have turkeys around here. We see them all the time, and then we'll go 6 months and we won't ever see them. And I haven't seen turkeys out in my yard in probably 6 months. And I looked out today and there was 8 or 9 of them walking across my yard. So they just kind of move around. But just, so anybody who heard me say this about coyotes, don't misunderstand me. Go kill all you want. I am not in any way saying to protect the coyotes, because here's the deal. They don't need your protection. You kill all you want and their population will be right back where it was within just a few months. And it might even be bigger. So, and if you don't,
it might be bigger. Yeah.
If you don't believe me, read up on it. You'll find out that's true. So, well, Janelle, if there any parting words or anything you'd like to tell anybody, we got off of cryptids there and started talking about just natural wildlife, but is there anything you'd like to say before we end the show?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, I definitely believe these things exist. I'm not sure that they show themselves to everybody. I think women alone are probably more likely to run into them because they're not intimidated by women. I think we're sometimes their entertainment. I think when they like to watch children play, they like to watch what women are doing outside, and they also like to watch what we're doing inside. I now keep my blinds as tight as I can get them. I make sure that nobody can see the little holes where the thread goes through the blind. I'm careful at nighttime now. But yeah, I think they're less likely to bother houses where there are men around.
You're pretty sure they're not aggressive, or at least the ones you've been in contact with were never really super aggressive with you, were they?
Only after the researchers started coming down and going into their territory. Now, I would walk into their territory too, but I was no threat. I think they felt the men were a threat, and then they took it out on me by beating the side of the wall, and then coming up the rose thing up the side of the wall, and they started showing. I got a feeling of aggression. I mean, aside from that one jumping up and down and screaming and then beating the wall, and that was definite aggression. But they took it out on me. That's the interesting thing. They felt that I was to blame for those people coming down there and getting in their business. So I think they can be aggressive. They definitely show anger, but the rest of the time, I think I was entertaining them. I think I was their television. I don't know. But of course, I don't think many people go to the window and talk to them either, like I did. Like an idiot.
Well, it's perfully understandable.
Boy, if I'd only known. If I had only known, I'd have been hiding under the bed.
That's so funny. So funny. Well, listen, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. You've been very gracious and nice and sweet and very interesting to talk to.
Well, thank you. I just don't want anybody else to feel like they have to worry so much about what people think. Who cares what people think? You know, when you get right down to it. If they were to pay my bills or to give me my paycheck, I'd think twice. But until they do that, I don't care a whole lot.
Right.
I feel sorry for people who, have to keep it bottled up inside. I mean, I've kept it bottled up for all these years. I've never told anybody what I've told you tonight.
Wow.
But I also see people struggling with it on your website. And I hope that it'll help them not to struggle, by telling you these things. So
yeah, they can, if they want to get it off their chest or feel compelled to, then, they can email me just like you and we'll get you on here. And yeah,
they're in a very safe space with you.
Right. And, or they could just write it as a story and I'll be glad to narrate it. Well, listen, thank you again. I'm going to wind this up. I want you to, if you would, hang on after I say goodbye to everybody here.
Okay, I sure will. Thank you.
Everybody, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you guys on the next one. Thanks.